Can you hear me? Great. Um, so by looking at the, oh, grab it. Okay. Okay. So by looking at the online posters, I shouldn't say look, we watched the online presentation, online posters, and we divided into the three big themes, and then that's how we're going to go through the sessions. First, ideas of a classroom implementation. Second, in the classroom and corporate and collaboration implementation. And third, learnability and teachability with technology in online courses. And we have time for questions and reflections. But we're here to observe your ideas, so we might not have any answers, but we're here to learn. Um, First of all, ideas of classroom implementation. And we further divided into three overarching themes. One is language app and SNS and multimodal authoring, and third is gaming. And One Wolf and poster talked about Quizlet, which is the online flashcard, which has a feature of visual and audio. And she talked about the correlation among the Chinese learners, heritage and non-heritage, for their effect of pronunciation in oral test results. And Alam's poster talked about her own experience for learning Spanish, by using various types of language apps that's out there. And highlighted in red is particularly the one that she talked about in the poster. And those two posters kind of representing the realities of what is happening outside of the classroom, and as a educator or practitioners have a choice to integrate that into the classroom. So that's one of the implications. And tomorrow's talked about the digital storytellings. So here, students as the storytellers can complete a content-based approach or project-based approach, and have a place to express themselves or have a place to listen to others' opinions. And Jakob's poster talked about the meme and how to utilize that to ESL students. And he particularly talked about two phases: hookup by using the existing meme, and lookup for creating their own memes. And he introduced how to create the memes in the posters. And the third is Monday and all talked about how to utilize Instagram for the speaker of Spanish, and creating the everyday challenge by picking up a word or phrase. So they have a space to interact each other by commenting or putting the likes outside of the classroom, but it was as a class activity. And three of those posters were really representing that the digital resources are creating the writing for purposes for certain audiences, so they have meaningful purpose to write something. And so all those three posters were really about the language through purposeful and creative practices, and giving the more opportunities to use target languages in various modalities, and also giving the ownership of the learners. And the third third overarching theme is the gaming. And Roland said, described about how the games can be used as a resource for learning vocabulary efficiently. And she talked about particular game features that will help learning vocabulary per se, but something beyond learning more than vocabulary. And she also talked about the learner's side and what kind of benefit that they get out of using the digital games. And Newgarden and Warner et al. Study posters actually talked about how to implement that into practice. And Newgarden's poster was introduced in a model for using MMORPG, and she was using ecological, dialogical, and distributed view of L2 learning, and using the linguistic style match. One of the big findings was a smoothly coordinated interactions had higher alignment of spoken languages among the native speaker and the ESL learners. And another finding was the course design and games interactive nature afforded the linguistic and social cultural attunement and language use. And Warner et al.'s poster was also introducing the model for integrating digital games in curriculum. And by calling this course in action, they particularly focused on awareness of the particular genre and also language use in social context beyond classroom. And they casted a lot of big, important questions, and one of the questions that stood out to me was the familiarity with genre, that particularly in this case it's a gaming, and gaming was familiar to certain group of students, but may not be familiar to other students. And when we think about bringing the authentic materials into the classroom, and we might have to think about how to bridge that familiarity of certain genres to academic practices, or is it appropriate to my audience or in this space, or what is, how appropriate is this materials into certain practices? So that was a really interesting questions. And overall in this 8 posters, concurrent theme was the choice. So the digital resources was given a choice or alternative choice to having more ownership of the learning or space. That's another recurring theme, that giving more space to express themselves or alternative space to have express themselves or hear others' opinions. So there are meaningful, dynamic, and complex interactions were facilitated in that, and that's what the digital resources can bring into. And as one of the things, I guess that all of us educators or practitioners on some ways for the language programs, we kind of have to think about the students that we have having a lot of accesses to the authentic resources or digital resources right now. And that's kind of a thing that I thought about by watching all those posters, is that we might have to know what's their literacy practices outside of the classroom when we think about bringing into the classroom. Because without knowing what they're actually doing outside of the classroom, we might not know that what's their familiar genre, what is the practice that they'll be doing, what kind of media that they are familiar and not familiar. And that this is something that's going to be different per programs, per languages or proficiency levels. And something that, for example, for the Warner et al.'s poster, so gaming may not be familiar for the type of students that they have in the language of German studies, but it might be appropriate for other departments. Like I teach Japanese, it might be more appropriate for the Japanese as a foreign language type of group of students that I have. So that's something that interesting to think about when we think about the classroom implementations. And I'm really interested in how, what kind of questions you have or reflection about all the posters, and I would love to hear that at the end of the session for the question time. And Jake gonna talk about the next section.
Thanks, Kyle. So my peers here had some very fantastic slides. You'll have to forgive me, my slides. They're a little bit dense, please. They're dense to distract you from me because I'm very nervous. So if you look at the screen, then we'll all be okay. All right, so I'll be talking about corpora and authors Pereira, Da Cunha Silva, and Lange. And then I'll be talking about telecollaboration, specifically video conferencing, Facebook, online notebooks, and some other materials. And those were presented by Schaefer, Sanchez, Halbego and Osborne, Villa, Talagani, Nikazam, and Muller, Morgan-Gunn, Ismailova, and Ismailova Culpepper. And to those presenters, if I butchered your last name, I apologize. I did my best. So in Pereira e da Cunha Silva, they were talking about corpora, and they really brought up that they wanted to use corpora in a student-centered teacher as facilitator type way. They used Sketch Engine as the corpus tool, and they were trying to promote linguistic competence, critical thinking, and learning responsibility. And the tasks they were trying to have students accomplish were to resolve problems with commonly misused words, adverbs, and adjectives, all using Sketch Engine word clouds, collocations, or word clusters, and brainstorming. One of the links between these two, there it goes, right there. The student-centeredness there, and then I think learning how to learn is a key point that we'll come back to later. In Lam's study, he was taking English learners that had about 12 plus years of English experience, and their goals were jobs in Hong Kong or continuing on to graduate school. He wanted to bridge that. He theorized that there's this gap between literature, linguistics, and digital literacies, and he also wanted to give his BA students transferable computer skills, something that he didn't necessarily feel English majors were encountering in English classes. You can see his tools there. I won't read all of them, but again, his challenges that he faced were with his participants were some of them had computer phobia, they had a diversity of knowledge of prior experience, and then he's trying to, again, bridge that gap between theory and practice for the students as well. And Schaefer goes on to talk about intercultural issues and telecollaboration. And I think that Schaefer really opens up the discussion for the rest of the presentations I'm going to talk about. He looks at 4 studies, and you can see them there. Based on those studies, he theorized that further research will need to discuss how to implement methodological procedures in cultural activities that do more than promote the target culture and essentialist visions grounded in national paradigms. And it's as if the next 4 were trying to answer this question. Sanchez talks about participant positioning strategies and telecollaborative tandem exchanges. What they're looking at was exploring reciprocity and positioning. You can see how many participants they had. Tools were Blackboard Collaborate, Instant Messenger, speaking a little bit towards Dr. Thorne's research there. And they found that students positioned as peers and not as experts, or they positioned as experts for brief moments of turn-taking, which was counter to the literature that they had encountered. Now, Salbego and Osborne, in their intercultural language learning through video production, they asked how they could help students who are learning a target language in a foreign context to achieve intercultural competence. And they used Byram's model of intercultural competence and Seeley's big C and little c, while they were focusing on trying to develop the little c in their students' interactions. They thought that that was something that could be done with their peers. Again, looking at this peer-to-peer model is something that we'll come back to later. They were making videos of intercultural exploration by the native speaker and then sharing with the non-native speaker and then exchanging those videos. So it was really an interesting presentation. They looked at teacher and peer assessment as well as self-evaluation. So again, another key term here is self-evaluation. They were looking in their assessments for what exceeds expectation, meets it, and a comments box, which seems strange to point out, but this was all self-eval and peer eval, and also teacher eval. So they're looking at all 3 of those things in combination to really try to extrapolate where is the student at. In Villa's telecollaboration planning and assessment, it was another teletandem, or telecollaboration study with a 50-50 exchange. Their tools were Moo's email, and antiquated email, forums, and Skype. However, I think in combination with the other tools there, it's important to note that that's a way to bring that back to the fore of technological discussions. Chat topics were used to find the information to create personal blog entries. And again, what we're seeing is this focus on personal responsibility. They assessed on engagement, language, competency, and cultural competency, and they're hoping to look more towards task-based projects and chat sessions that address more than one learning outcome in the future. And sure enough, Talagani, Nikazem, and Muller do look at that. in their study, they used OneNote as a digital class notebook that gave immediate feedback, evaluation, and progress. And students were surveyed on digital literacy, digital communication, and intercultural competence. They were asked to post these videos that explored, again, sort of what they found to be culturally relevant, and to discuss things with the non-native speakers and native speakers that brought their own cultural identities to kind of the discussion among the class and among their peers. So it was an interesting way to look at that. Morgan and Gunn and Ismailova Culpepper both get to Facebook telecollaboration. Morgan and Gunn were looking for bringing monolinguals into the classroom. They thought that based on their literature, they were looking at motivation, collaborative learning, cultural competence, and autonomy. You can see the actful skills that the authors believe Facebook addresses. They talk about the good and the bad anecdotally, where students engage in the familiar platforms, the actful skills, and it allows for monitoring, notifications, and reminders for the class. I thought it was really interesting, the bad that they pointed out here. Students say Facebook is more social, but Twitter is more professional. That blew my mind. I'm not sure if any of you have encountered that. I think that it's an interesting observation that would bear some further study. They said that Facebook use can be annoying because not it can be annoying probably for the things that Dr. Thorne mentioned. It's for the current generation somewhat antiquated. And then they also said that not all native speakers are sensitive to non-native speaker learning. So they encountered during their study some individuals who were very much to use their words, grammar Nazis. And it was a little bit difficult for some of the students, their feelings got hurt and they weren't exactly motivated to continue any longer, which is something important to consider. Now, Ismailova Culpepper, where they were fostering the development of intercultural competence, they were looking at how does telecollaboration in an SNS contribute to students' IC development, and what is the role of Facebook in the intercultural exchange as a medium. You can see the participants there and what they did. Students reported Facebook is familiar and easy to use. It's already part of their online routine, and they appreciated its informality. So there you get a little bit of a conflicting data stream, where in the bad of Morgan and Gunn, students were feeling that Facebook is a little bit passé. But on the other hand, Facebook for Ismailova Culpepper students was something that they were happy to use and excited to use in their classroom. So I think, again, that talks to Dr. Thorne's maybe cultures of use. Where are you using these things? And who are the groups of individuals who you are trying to engage? So just some reflection points on my end. In these studies, technological artifacts were used as a lens to further synthesize and problematize literature, language, and culture. And so I thought that it would be useful to continue the research into corpora, telecollaboration, examining intercultural competence, and language learning. There's some commas there, sorry about that. The current pedagogical trends gravitate toward learner training for self-awareness. And this is what I was trying to point out earlier. This is one of the big themes that I saw in all of these studies, was that there's this trend of self-responsibility, learner responsibility, not just the flipped classroom, but really trying to teach students how to teach themselves, which I think is something we're all probably interested in. The students and in these studies are ready and willing to collaborate digitally, but I think one of the big questions we have to ask is, how do we take advantage of that without losing the engagements of students while avoiding the wow factor? And I know that there's plenty of research into that, but I think it's something that we have to confront every time we implement a new technology in the classroom. We need to really look at, okay, if we're going to use Snapchat or Instagram, then how do we do it so that students aren't just, playing, but they're actually learning and playing at the same time? And then, again, I mentioned the peer. I wanted to come back to that. The role of the peer seems to be more fully acknowledged and realized in these studies. And it kind of contradicts previous literature's findings. So it would be useful to study this so that we can get some clarification. Maybe it deals with cultures of use. Maybe it deals with, again, where the students are at in their level of education. So we should take a look at that. And now I'd like to turn the time over to Christine Lange.
Okay. So I looked at the group of posters that circled around professional development of instructors for the technology integration in the classroom, the readiness of learners and instructors to engage effectively with digital literacies, and online language courses. And similar to the posters that were already synthesized by Jake and Kayo, we had a wide variety of contexts and frameworks and methods in this group of posters that I reviewed, as you can see on the slide. So for instance, Harris' presentation, we hear about the flipped classroom as one framework that allows pre-service teachers to implement technology effectively. And then Wang, Gaspar, and Tim Lin, in their study with graduate student teachers and language program directors, position themselves to Thorne and Reinhardt's bridging activities, as well as multiliteracies frameworks. And Brockbank designed a case study with a predominantly Spanish-speaking family and incorporated interviews and intervention or small tasks into his research design to find out about the family's technology use at home. Many of the posters, especially those that develop pedagogical material, incorporated students' feedback, either through survey questions or open-ended questions. For instance, Lee, in their development of online courses for Chinese language learners, or Furness and Klein-Heider's presentation on designing an online language learning strategy module. In addition to looking at the research of the posters connected to professional development and online courses, we also identified 3 overarching themes that came up again and again when we viewed these posters and discussed them. The first one is interaction and diversity. Then there's readiness, and the question mark here is intentional. And then training and development. And I will just briefly talk about these 3 themes. So interaction and diversity, the presentation by Lee deals directly with interaction and specifically interaction in online language courses. They offer a new perspective on interaction and online language learning, emphasizing that the online environment in particular allows the effective implementation of several tools and activities that promote interactional modes. In their study with over 130 learners of Chinese in online language courses at Purdue University, they integrated student content interaction, student-instructor interaction, and student-student interaction through synchronous meetings, reflective journals, small group activities, and asynchronous discussion. Student feedback was very positive, and the different levels of interaction often served as a booster for participation in these online courses. And then students described the online environment as a mix of freedom and pressure. They had a choice in how and when the learning happened, but the online environment still created a learning community. And then the presentation by Godwin Jones and Torres, Aristeia Hitchism, and Tackett extends this discussion and focuses on learner autonomy, mobility, and diversity. Their projects are very different in design. Torres and colleagues present on different digital resources that support K-12 pre-service teachers in their classrooms, whereas Godwin Jones presents on an electronic textbook that they developed and piloted with first semester German students. But both presentations highlight that digital tools allow for diversity in recognizing student backgrounds, skills, and abilities, and individualization in language classrooms, for instance, through incorporating non-traditional themes and sensitive topics in discussions. Connecting all these affordances of digital literacies and online environments for language learning, Meran, Meraza, Koguchi, and Takamuri, and Brockbank ask us if our learners are ready to benefit from these environments, or what we as language teachers need to know about their familiarity with technologies before we can implement them effectively into our classrooms. Using a questionnaire with almost 300 Japanese English learners, Meran and colleagues found that learners have access to the necessary online tools, but they often have difficulty using them. So, for instance, they mentioned that Japanese students often have difficulty with English typing skills. And bringing the discussion to a very different context, that of family life, Brockbank calls for a better understanding of how technologies are used in learners' homes and a better understanding of their lives and communities to support efficient technology incorporation in schools. So, for example, the bilingual family that they studied used technology as an infrastructure, but it also informed power, privacy, and freedom in the family's life. And then the question of readiness is answered in the negative by the presentations of Furness and Kleinheider, Wang, Gaspar, and Timlin, and Harris. And they introduce different ways of how language learners, graduate student teachers, language program directors, and ESL instructors can be supported. Noticing a gap in their student learning strategy skills, Furness and Kleinheider developed an online model for University of Houston students enrolled in German classes. In this model, students reflect on myths about language learning. They're introduced to language learning tools and strategies, and they reflect on their own language learning process. The online module aims to better prepare learners for the learning of languages and introduces them to several digital literacies that they can use to help them. Asking similar questions, but with their focus on graduate student teachers and language program directors, Wang and colleagues, I think they're in the audience, they designed 2 surveys to find out how these 2 groups use technology in their classrooms, and then also what kind of training they have received to support them with that. They noticed a gap in the professional development of graduate student teachers for the effective technology use in classrooms that goes beyond the wow factor. And then they develop a training model. This model not only emphasizes becoming better teachers, but also collaborating with faculty and with your language program administrators to develop as researchers and view the learning of teaching and the learning of being an academic as a process. And then also reporting on the online professional development for ESL teachers, Harris presents on Links, the Literacy, Information and Communication System, which is a series of free online material for ESL teachers' professional development. The material addresses digital literacies, digital information literacy, and problem solving with technology and how they can be implemented into ESL classrooms. Harris also presents approaches of how teachers could engage with this material, which they tried out with a group of ESL instructors and colleagues. This approach included cycles of face-to-face meetings, video conferencing, online discussion, material development, and its implementation. This is the last slide. Just like my colleagues, Kayo and Jake, I would like to end this part of the synthesis with a few reflections, things that I noticed when I reviewed this part of the poster presentations that stood out in terms of implications for research and pedagogy. Many of the posters, such as Furness and Kleinheider, Godwin and Jones, and Harris, mention access, mobility, or open educational resources as one of the major affordance for digital classrooms. Through studies like the one by Meran and colleagues, we have learned, though, that access does not necessarily translate into usability. Access also calls for a culture of sharing and collaboration, as for instance Lee promotes through their incorporation of student feedback in the design of the online courses. Or Harris through sharing how exactly working with online professional development modules can support in-service pre-service teachers. And Wang, Gaspar, and Timlin promote a culture of collaboration through the constant exchange of knowledge and experiences with other language departments, not just your home department, and the shared work and efforts of graduate students and faculty, which can also be research. So I think we can certainly say that the question, why should we integrate technology and digital literacy, is no longer asked, but has moved to a question of how. How should we incorporate technology into our classrooms? And while we were reviewing these posters, additional questions began to form. So what does it mean to be ready for digital literacies? When do we know that we're ready? And do we have to be ready? Yeah. And we would like to end this presentation with these questions and invite you to ask many, many more and find answers with us together. Thank you.